Mathilda gasped sharply as she saw the two bodies fell in front of her. Her frightened eyes stared in horror and surprise at the scene that was unfolding a few steps away. That man, he was scary. He had killed those mercenaries in the blink of an eye, shooting and beheading some of them in such incredible speed that it didn't even seem real. All that went through her mind as she watched him move like a god of death through the darkness, and that was what this man wasn't human. He couldn't be. There was no way he was. He was too violent and too brutal. Her hands gripped her mother's arms tightly in an attempt to protect her in some way. As a future policewoman, situations like this could happen at some point perhaps. She had to be strong, brave, but how on earth could she do that when her entire family has been kidnapped by such an armed lunatics and one man is killing them in a real slaughter? That's not what she signed up for. Just behind the masked man stood her father, his rifle in hand, raised at any of the two men that came towards them. They weren't many, as the masked man killed them before, and they even got close. They ran into the forest, hearing the sound of the siren in the facility behind them. However, no one came out. The siren was beeping to deaf ears, and judging by the rather calm by the way the masked man was walking at the moment, she could say that there was no longer any threat out there. Oh God, please!" She heard her mother's murmurs and whispers, pressing her tightly against her body, praying to the Lord in heaven that they would be safe, that it would be over. Mathilda hugged her tightly, and her mother hugged her back, one trying to comfort her to the side and to hide herself underneath, to protect her from the evils that surrounded them. Her father's footsteps caught her attention, and Mathilda looked at him with trembling, wet eyes. She had been holding back the urge to cry for some time. He just looked at her, just as frightened, but with determination that she didn't have yet. The glow that she hadn't seen since they left the gang conflicted. He put a hand on his mother's back, who was trembling, frightening in shock. Mathilda was too. Her legs seemed to lose strength with every step, but she held on. She held on to what she was holding on to. She didn't know. "It's going to be all right, I'm here," her father began to comfort her, slowing his steps, hugging her tightly again in the body in the protective way. His arm embraced the both women and Mathilda. As strong as he tried to look, he did not refuse his protective embrace, leaning on her father to try and keep from falling, feeling that the cold sensation could run through her body. It seemed to pierce her mind, and to look at what she was hiding, so blue, boiling with rage, but at the same time as sympathetic as the waters of the calm sea. The eyes that caused incredible fear within her, but at the same time aroused a great curiosity, a familiarity that she couldn't explain the feeling. At the same time as she felt the urge to run away as soon as possible, to get as far away as soon as possible. Her body yearned to run towards him and embrace him. He was big and intimidating, like no one has ever seen before. But at the same time he gave her such a warm feeling, as if being close to him just felt right. It was confusing. It was strange. It was wrong. The man just continued to stare at them, waiting patiently for them to continue. Not wanting to make him angry or push her luck, Mathilda carefully undid the hug, as if her father realized what she was thinking. He turned and faced the man in front of him, standing in both women in a form of protection. "There's a helicopter nearby." That was all the man said, his deep, strong voice sending shivers through Mathilda's body, and apparently the bodies of both her father and mother, as she saw them react. She had heard that voice before, although deep and cold. It was too familiar for her not to have heard it before. And perhaps a sense of familiarity was due to the fact that she had seen that man before in the attack that took place in Washington. Was that the man who faced those monsters? Questions ran through her mind. Why was he there? Who were those men? Were they kidnapped? What did they want with him? Of course, she left those questions to herself and followed her parents as they began to move. In a matter of minutes of slow walking, they reached a large helicopter. dimly lit as to not attract attention. The masked man entered the cabin, and the helicopter's rear ramp lowered. The lights came on. Her father took the lead as Mathilda accompanied her mother into one of the seats, sitting down next to her without letting go of her. "It's okay, Mom. It's okay," she said, her voice slightly slurred, and her hands still shaky as before. Seeing her mother like that made it hard for her to hold back tears, which began to run shyly down her face. Her father crouched down in front of them, squeezing her hands, kissing her mother's hand, trying to comfort her. The masked man watched from afar, his rifle now at his back. "Ghost of Purgatory, can't come in." His voice caught their attention, who caught them glancing at the radio, walking past some supplies in the corner of the helicopter. "Purgatory here," Elia replied, after a few seconds of silence. "I found them, on the way to the BSAA, Ghost said, picking up the small bag with the medical kit and some bottles of water and protein bars. "Great news! The BSAA field is busy at the moment, but they should clear you out to land soon. I'll let Chris know." Ghost shook his head. "I've solved our supply problem," he said, the silence lingering for a few seconds. "Really, how?" Elia asked. "Our national security advisor is now our friend. He'll give us whatever we ask for," Ghost said. "Really? Not that I'm doubting you or anything, but I don't know how you did it, but are you sure he'll do it?" Ghost let out a nasal laugh in disdain. "Of course he will. If not, I'll send my men to his family's location," Ghost said again, and the woman was silent for a few moments. "Ghost, that's not—" "You heard me, Elia. Without hesitation, Ghost out," he said, ending the call and picking up the bag of supplies. With light steps he approached his parents, letting out a sigh of seeing them so intensive in his presence. It was understandable. It couldn't be helped. "For here," he said, handing his bag to his father, who took it with some uncertainty. "For security reasons, I'm taking you to the BSAA base in Philadelphia. They're going to do some tests to see if you're all right, and then you'll be taken home," he replied, and his father stood up while Mathilda grabbed the bottle of water. "What's going on? Why are we here? Who are you?" his father bombarded with questions. Ghost wanted to tell the truth. He really did. They deserved it. But they also hired to get to know subjects for their experiments that turns humans into monsters, just like the ones you saw. "What?" her mother exclaimed, her face contorted with disbelief. Mathilda gritted her teeth and swallowed some saliva and felt a chill run down her spine. So she and her parents could have been turned to monsters like that? How could she react to that? What she should say? There was anything to say. "Are you fucking kidding me?" Her father reacted sharply, his expression troubled, and his tired eyes clear in contempt. "I'm a partner of the BSAA, and we do some operations together. We've been keeping an eye on those mercenaries for a while, and when we heard that they had kidnapped some civilians, we have managed to track them down, and here I am," he explained, watching his father sit down slowly, somewhat disoriented. He found it hard to swallow all that information. Ghost would give anything to them, not to have gone through that, anything to keep them away and safe. "Why us?" Mathilda asked, feeling her body shiver again as the man looked at her. "No reason, unfortunately. You were just the unlucky ones chosen this time," Ghost said, taking 2 steps back towards the cabin. "But you're safe. Everything will be fine now." That's what he said before turning and walking towards the cabin, getting ready for the helicopter in the air. Mathilda watched him walk away, feeling her body being pulled by her father, along with her mother. Not everything would be all right. The scars would remain, but she was grateful for the man for getting them out of there. Settling down, she closed her eyes and felt the helicopter take off and keep them closed, unable to shake the familiar feeling she had towards the agent. Ghost sighed a few times as he piloted the helicopter. He was glad that he had managed to save them before it was too late. But he knew that they wouldn't exactly be okay ever again. It was a traumatic situation, and it would certainly leave some after effects. He could only hope that they would recover quickly. The journey back home was some time, but soon Ghost landed the helicopter at the BSAA camp. He stepped down near the rear ramp and got out of the vehicle, watching as some of the men from the medical team approached his family. The agent walked away at a brisk pace, but continued to watch as they were escorted to the medical wing. He missed them. He realized how much he missed them. He had spent so long absorbed in these missions, he hadn't realized how much he was missing, and how lonely he was. They seemed fine. Ghost snapped out of his thoughts when Chris's voice came in from behind him. The man stood next to him, catching a glimpse of him. More or less, I'd say. The wounds aren't physical, he replied, and Ghost snorted. Chris snorted. Yes, it was a traumatic situation. They'll be fine. I'll mobilize a team to accompany them in their case. Ghost turned to Chris, his eyes still looking at him sympathetically. I appreciate it, he said, and Chris shook his head. Don't mention it. We're on the same side, Chris said. How's Falcon? Ghost asked, turning around and starting to walk inside the facility. Resting, he'll be fine, with no serious consequences, Chris replied, following him. That's good to hear. And Hunk? Ghost asked. Resting in a private room, and there's one for you on the first floor. Room 35. There are some clothes for you. I know you're tired, so I won't bother you for long, Chris said. Stop walking and when they reached the lobby. You didn't have to, but I'll accept the arrest. Thanks again, Redfield. Chris gave him a small smile and a pat on the shoulder before turning and walking away. Ghost watched him for a few moments before sighing and walking towards the elevator, stretching. A shower and a rest would come in very handy right now. He couldn't wait. He reached a room 35, and it was rather a large room. Like a hotel, it was a double bed with a table, a large television in front of it. In the corner was a nightstand with a chair and a lamp. In the opposite corner was a large closet. In the corner of the room, next to the table and the television, there was a medium-sized fridge with a microwave next to it. Next to the door was the bathroom, very spacious, unlike the military sympathetically that he was used to. The agent quickly undressed and entered the bathroom, sighing with a certain pleasure when water hit his body. He closed his eyes, letting himself get lost in his mind for a while. With his last mission accomplished, his biggest and only threat at the moment was Albert. After that, everything would be easier. And with that comes a question he always avoided. What could he do? Of course, a part of him wants to help Hunk control things, keep an eye on the world, maybe even train a new agents, increase his shadow organization, keep the nations and their people. But another part of them was the part that become involved, feels so too much, thinks not that it's life, but another part wants him to knew it was impossible, quiet and peaceful life. Shaking his head, Ghost turned off the shower. He would deal with that situation when it came, but at the moment he had other things to worry about. Stepping out of the shower, he dried himself off and walked to the closet, a set of black clothes, sweatpants and a long-sleeved shirt, military boots and gloves. He got dressed, leaving the boots and gloves in the same place. At the moment he picked up his mask, he heard knocks on his door. Despite the BS being in the BSAA facility, he grabbed his silver ghost just in case and approached with light, silent steps. Ghost? He was relieved to hear a familiar voice, place his silver ghost on the table in front of the bed. Just as he walked over the door, a little curious and suspicious. Just before opening it, he put on his mask. He opened the door and his eyes looking curiously at the woman in front of him. Little Redfield, good to see you, he said, and Claire smiled gently in his direction. Ghost blinked a few times. She looked fine, but there was something different about her. He could feel like if it was a sixth sense. Hey, I hope I'm not in the way. I mean, I probably am, but you've probably just come back from a mission, she said, sounding a little uncertain, with some intention as the woman fiddled with her nails. Oh, no problem, it's fine, he said, and the woman smiled at him, her eyes shining in a different way. Sorry, I wanted to talk after Walter gave me your gift, she said, entering the room and passing Ghost at a brisk pace. The man stared at nothing, a little confused, closing the door with slow, uncertain movement. He did? He asked, turning and taking one or two short steps towards the woman, who was running her eyes around the room. It shouldn't have happened so soon, but I guess I can't blame him, she laughed softly, turning to him. He said something like that, she said, putting both her hands on behind hers. So, what do you think? He asked. crossing his arms and leaning against the corner of the wall. "Oh, it's great. Everything I imagined it would be. Really, Ghost, thank you so much," she said, her smile disappearing from her face and serious eyes in her glare, making the man swallow some saliva. "No need to thank me," he said, and she shook her head a little. "No, I do need to thank you," she said in a serious tone, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "How did you manage it? Walter told me you were short on resources." Ghost lowered his head slightly and snorted, walked over to the fridge, grabbing a bottle of water. "I took it out of my paycheck," he said, lifting his mask and drinking half of the bottle. "You have a paycheck?" Claire asked, an arched eyebrow. "Of course, it's kind of a guarantee in case we're unable to carry out the missions, or if one day we finish our work. Hunk and I gave a lot of our own money to help the organization, and I took a bit more for the gift," he replied, leaving the water bottle on the table beside him. Claire, for her part, just stared at the table with a distant look, her eyes clasped together in front of her body. "Really? I can't thank you enough," she said, still staring at the table, despite lowering her head a little. A sigh escaped her lips. "But it's not that I didn't like it. Far from it in the fact. But why?" She raised her face, her eyes meeting his, who felt a little pressured, confronted with some point, making him take a small step back. "I wanted to help you, to do something nice for you for a change," he said, struggling, breaking eye contact by looking away, and his hand run down the back of his neck. "You've helped me a lot," she said, standing up slowly, and lowered his gaze. "We've become more closer recently. We joke, we tease each other, we talk. I could say that we've become very good friends." The man raised his gaze again and crossing his arms. "I guess so," he said, and she began putting her hands together in front of her body, lowering her gaze as she took 2 or 3 more steps to the man's left. "I've come to trust you, and I think you trust me too. I hope," she said, raising her gaze again and meeting his. She could hear his heart racing a little faster, could see his agitation. "At some point it didn't cross it in your mind that you would tell me what you couldn't before." He took a small step back, his eyes shifting from place to place, but never lingering on hers more than a few moments. "There are things I can't tell you, and the less you get involved the better," he said, his thick voice a little slurred, but low but a deep tone. "I think I am ready more than involved in this. I could say I'm already part of it, couldn't I?" Claire replied, putting her right arm lean on the table. "You're always so intense. In so many ways you don't relax. You don't calm down, always looking over your shoulder, always attentive, always alert. Don't you think you could be capable a bit more normal with me, or Sherry, or even Chris?" Ghost shook his head, walking over to the bed, tossing his cell phone, and let out a tired, restless sigh. His heart was pounding in his chest, and he felt a knot in his stomach. "It's who I am, considered of my surroundings, of how I'm still alive. I'm not fit for normality," he said, and it was time Claire let out a long sigh. "Do you really believe that, or did William force you to believe it?" Her question made the agent look at her suddenly, the silence lingering between them for a few moments. "What thinks he's superior?" she shouted back, and the man shook his head, closing some eyes with force. "I made a choice, except you didn't have one. But it created who I am today. It created this ancient, mutilated terrorism. I cut this world from inside out. My life has been stolen, but I'm allowed to save the countless others. I'm a killer, a destroyer, fighting what's always been good at. From an early age, at least, I'm fighting for what I believe in. And I believe that there is no one in this world who can survive me. Thanks to the choice I made," he said, his breathing now rapid, fists clenched and his eyes half closed. He felt that he had so much to say, but he didn't know how, and he didn't even know if he should say it. Part of him was just trying to convince him that it would be better if he simply asked the woman to leave the room. The tiredness, the fatigue, from everything that's happened over the last few days, were catching up with him. Yes, you were saved, you've killed, you've changed the whole world, but along the way, you allowed yourself to get lost. You lost who you were, buried deep inside that ancient you are now. You're not just that, Leon. You're just a killing machine. You're gentle and kind, and you're so much more than you let yourself believe. I just want to see that, and I didn't come here to argue," Claire said, controlling her tone, controlling her feelings, and her mind digesting his words. She had no doubt that he did everything he did, changed everything that changed, but still didn't stop believing who he was. The Leon she knew was capable of doing what he did, not because he was skilled, but simply because he wasn't that kind of man. From what she had seen recently, that friendly cop was still there, buried somewhere. "I'm beyond that, Claire. I do what's best. It's not always good," he said. His tone was a little calmer, but his voice was imposing. His eyes were now scanning the floor, and his head remained low. "That doesn't make you a bad person, I told you. I've seen who you really are, and that man under the mask is a heart of gold. I think it's possible for you to remain the agent you are, but still you have that heroic heart," she said, and Ghost just laughed in some disdain. Not at her, but at himself, wondering how she could maintain such a positive view of him, even after everything. "Claire, listen." He faced her mask, leaning on the table with his right arm. "I just threatened to kill a mother and child." His blue eyes shone with coldness, showing the contempt for himself beneath that mask. "You have no idea what I'm capable of. I can be cruel, selfish, and ignorant when I want to. Heroes don't kill for those who deserve it. Heroes don't torture or threaten the innocent people. Whatever way you see me, it's wrong," he said, almost now in a whisper, his eyes staring instantly on the ground. Blinking a few times, the agent moves away from the table and sits back down on the bed. To his surprise, Claire does the same, sitting down next to him. "Everything you said to me? Everything you did? Leon, you were forced to. The innocent blood you spilled is already corrupted. There's no turning back. The torture you committed was the only way you could get a message across. After all, it's the only ways this person listens, threatens. As far as I know, your family was to get involved, and being who you are, do what you do, what you have seen. I won't say I sympathize, but I understand why you did it," she said, and her eyes focused on the ground. In front of her were the hands in front of her body. Her voice was so vividly, causing a huge contrast with that moments ago. Ghost just listened in silence, digesting those words and thinking back at his actions. "I'm just trying to say this isn't simply laid back and white, black and white. It's simply more complex than it seemed. And to be honest, I don't think you should have done if you didn't think to come across this line at times," Claire said, turning her face towards him, searching for his eyes. "They fear what they don't know. They don't know the BSAA has limits. They know that the government's predictable. It's bought, but they know the institutions and organizations are corrupt, and they always have a hidden motive. But they didn't know anything about me and Hunk. About that we're fighting fire with fire. Playing fair wasn't an option. Limits was a word we don't know," he said, leaning his body against the forward, resting his arms on his thighs, his eyes still focusing on the ground. "Part of the reason I didn't want to tell you this, or Sherry, because I don't want to meet you, is because your tie to the past is this dangerous revisit. It's something that needs to stay in the memory," Ghost said, moving his head towards Claire, but still not looking at her. "Your past isn't just a memory, Leon. You may have not always been like where it takes you, but your past needs to be dealt with. Even if Sherry and I hated you, even if we were upset that you contacted us when you should have still done it, part of your past is ours too. By refusing to resolve it, we too would be incomplete," Claire said, taking a bit of courage and putting a hand on the man's shoulder, who remained silent for some time. He sighed, the anger and frustration now disappearing, giving away the tiredness fatigue. He had never felt as tired as he did at the moment. "I was a little afraid. My past seemed to be different from the life outside of the ordinary quiet one," he said, straightening his posture and looking at her in the eye for the first time in a while. "There's nothing wrong with wanting an ordinary life. You struggle too much. You're bound to get tired one day," he said, and he looked at his head, looking away. "Claire, after I finish my training, The more I went on missions, the more I faced biological weapons, the more I believed I wasn't afraid of anything. Superhumans, lickers, tyrants, or armies of hunters, nothing scared me. But for a man like me who doesn't fear the dangers of flesh, it's something that still haunts me. And this is peace, he said, confessed, looking at her in the eye again. The woman didn't say anything, and to be honest, she was having trouble thinking of what to say. I think you fought for too long and ended up forgetting how to let your guard down, Claire said, slightly squeezing his shoulder. I'll be there to help you with that. Me and Sherry, like I said, we want to help you. After all, I think it's the least what we can do. The man looked a little thoughtful, his eyes blinking slowly. There was an internal conflict and there was a certain difficulty in finding the right words. We'll see. That's what he replies after a few moments. And Claire, despite the small smile, couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Well, all things considered, it was better than nothing. Meant there was still a chance. It was enough for now. Now may I please see my knight's face? She asked in a lighter tone, trying to improve the chilly atmosphere that had taken over the place. Ghost snorted in amusement and shaking his head slightly. In defeat, he didn't object. He just raised his hand to the back of his mask and pulled it. His blonde hair fell over his face. He hadn't cut it in a while, almost completely covered his right eye. He brought his hand up to his blonde strands and flicked them back, in a futile attempt to tidy up. Claire held her breath as she analyzed his face. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't really think he would take off his mask, at least not easily. Maybe she wasn't as prepared as she thought. His face was more mature, more manly, but still very similar to the handsome young cop years ago. He had a few scars across his face, nothing too grotesque. Looking away from a certain angle, they were even attractive in a way. She slowly raised his hand to hers, and gently touching the slightly damp threads. His eyes met hers, and he felt a shiver run through her body. Unable to look away. Damn, he was hot. But he was just as hot. He was also tired. She could see it in those mesmerizing eyes. You kinda need a haircut. That's all she could say, stumbling over her own words, stammering a little and looking away, feeling her cheeks heat up a little. Wow, she felt like Claire of 8 years ago. Ghost, for his part, laughed a little, shaking his head as he hadn't had so much time for recent months. And you need to rest, she said shortly afterwards. He grunted softly. That I agree with, he said. He arched an eyebrow, making them just shrug. You said it, not me. The woman rolled her eyes as she stood up, ignoring her racing heart, trying to push away those memories of a hot night in an abandoned hotel. Well, I'll let you sleep. And I'm sorry I just came in just now, and I'll talk to you later, she said, a little hastily perhaps, but she knew it wasn't a good time to have a long conversation with him. Unfortunately, it would have to wait a little longer. She walked towards the doors and heard his footsteps behind her. Sure, I'll talk to you later. Thanks for stopping by, he said, uncertainty running his hand down the back of her neck. Claire, after opening the door, turned to him and gave him a friendly smile. No need to thank me. Not after that, believe me. It was good for both of us, she said, nodding to him before closing the door, leaving behind somewhat of a bewildered Ghost, confused, uncertain, and even a little shy. The man took a few deep breaths, turned and walked over to his bed, which he flopped onto, without caring much, sinking to his face on the soft pillow. He felt the sleep overtake him. He remembered the smile of Claire's, of those eyes, of a dangerous glint, in more ways than one. He couldn't help but grunt a little. Oh, that woman's going to be the death of me, he whispered, before falling completely asleep.